All right.
Yes, sir.
Good, good. All right, now, ladies. So for today's class, we're going to continue to look at African cultural retention. This is one of my favorite topics. Uh, last week we would have looked at all the Africans. So this is demography, or the Africans influence or demography. What else we looked at? What are the other contributions of the Africans?
Sir, medicine,
Their medicine, yes, very good. What else?
So religious practices,
The different religious practices, very good, excellent. What else we looked at?
musical aspects or instruments,
Yes, all the musics that they would have contributed to the region, excellent. Uh,
Language,
the language, yes. What else they would have contributed?
so dress, the dressing,
Dress, oh yes, like the cornrow, the lock, the what other dressing they have?
so like the hair ties,
Yes, the bantu knot, weave. You know that weave and all of those, is weave they call it? I don't know the female name for these things. You know. Is it weave, or when you use the other hair to plait,
yes,
uh
sir, weave,
is weave? All right. So the weaving also comes from the Africans because they used to weave other things in their hair, like trees, those little bamboo-like things. They used to put it in their hair. Also dyeing. You know that dyeing also comes from the African, where people dye their hair color into different colors. Hello, is the first time you're knowing that?
no, sir,
All right, good. So the dyeing of the hair also comes from the African. Do you know that makeup? What is the thing that you put over your eyes when you're going?
eyeshadow,
Is eyeshadow that little black thing or different colors the
eye,
females?
Eyeliner.
Eyeliner, that's what it's called. You know, the Africans were the first to create the eyeliner thing.
yes, sir.
Yes, because what they used to do is to mash this.
Egyptians usually use it.
Very good, excellent. Yes. So it's a lot of great things that comes from Africa, and a lot of these things that the world has adopted today. All right, and we still use it. Now, for today's class, we're going to look at reasons for the establishment, reasons the colonial establishment sought to restrict enslaved Africans from practicing their culture. So, what we're going to do, why did those in the colonies, the whites in the colonies, wanted to restrict the Africans from practicing their cultural habits? And we are going to describe the methods the African used, uh, the methods the colonial authorities used to prevent. So one is reason why they want it to happen and what they are going to do to stop the African or try to stop the African from practicing their culture. And then the next reason is that if we still have African culture today in the Caribbean, it shows that African cultures were retained. And if those cultures were retained, how they were able to retain despite the fact that Africans were prevented from practicing their culture. So we would have looked at some of the African cultures today earlier in our recap. So we look at things like their music, the song, the dance, yes, the language, the religion, the food. So all of these are African aspects of African culture that still remains with us today. All right. So my first question to you is reasons why do you believe that the Africans were, why the colonial authorities, who we consider the colonial establishment. So colonial authorities, colonial establishment, what is another name we give for them? It starts with G.
Through the government.
Very good, the colonial government. So why the colonial authority, also known as the colonial establishment or the colonial government, why do you believe that they wanted to stop the Africans from practicing their culture? Why do you believe they wanted to stop them?
So I think they
Sir, they
wanted
thought
to
it was
stop.
evil.
All right, go for me, Lorraine, and then
So I
Brown.
was saying I think they wanted to stop them because they didn't want like the Africans to like evolve and to maybe overthrow them one day, I guess.
So one, it's a fear of uprising. All right, sound good. Very good point. Excellent. Go ahead for me, Brown.
Sir, the Europeans didn't know what exactly they were doing, and they were fearful that it would destroy or negatively affect the plantation or them or their health.
Repeat that point for me. Repeat it. Just repeat it for me.
Sir, they didn't understand their culture or the things that they were doing, and because of that, they were fearful that it would negatively affect the productivity of the plantation and them and their health.
Very good. Very good. So they were. So one is that they did not understand African culture, and because of that African, they didn't understand. They were fearful for their health and something else you say. Health and,
So the productivity of the plantation.
all right, and also productivity. So productivity of the plantation. Very good, very good, very good. Excellent points. Anyone else? Please write these in your notebooks, ladies, as we go along. What
Sir,
other? Go ahead
they,
for me.
sir, they wanted them to fully submit to the white culture.
Yes. So they wanted them to submit. Hmm. They wanted them to submit to white culture. Yes. And that point, excellent point. Who made that point?
Sir Robinson.
Robinson. So they wanted the Africans to submit to the white culture. We hear a lot about white culture in on the US media. What is the name that they refer to it as?
Sir, US behavior?
Hmm?
Sir, I'm not sure.
Come on, ladies, think about it. You hear it so much in Black Lives Matter things. In the Black Lives Matter, everybody talk about it. Everybody talk about it.
Sir, is it white supremacy?
White supremacy, yes. So by submitting to white culture, you're advocating white supremacy. Very good. You know this stuff. Tell me now, what else? Think about it. Why do you believe the colonial establishment wanted to restrict the Africans from practicing their religion? Why was there a restriction? Denton, you had something to say? Denton is here?
Sir, I don't know if it makes sense, but I wanted to
Makes
say that
sense,
probably they
Denton.
wanted to keep some of the ideas to themselves, like some of the ideas that the Africans had. They wanted to use it for their advantage, and they didn't want the rest of the world to know about it.
It could be, yes. So they wanted cultural control.
Mm-hmm.
So you're correct, yes. They wanted cultural control. You're correct. Any other reasons? Any other reasons, ladies?
Sir, would it be that the planters or the plantation owners wanted them to focus on doing the work on the plantation?
So they wanted them to focus, so which links to the point of productivity, correct?
Yes, sir.
Because work equals productive. You don't want nobody dancing and say them I go to church. A lot of people, um, um, will not do the work because they said, oh, I'm going to a party, or I'm going to this, or I'm going to that. And so instead of spending time to do the work on the plantation, you're focusing on partying and or playing drums or blowing horns or things like that. And they didn't accept that. They didn't want that. So productivity was an issue. So ladies, thank you very, very much for your answers. Very good answers. Now I'm going to give you some other reasons or add to these reasons. All right? Give me a second, please. Okay. All right, ladies, sorry about that. So one of the main reasons that we have mentioned here, why they would have discouraged the Africans from practicing their culture, was the issue about resistance or uprising. They were very, very fearful that the Africans would resist slavery, and they didn't want them to resist slavery. They wanted to control them. And part of the controlling them, that cultural control, which was mentioned by one of the students, is that if I can control you, then it will prevent you from resisting. So part of the cultural, the reasons why they would have prevent them from, in terms of the resistance, or try to prevent them from resist, is that they try to control some of their instruments, their cultural instruments. So for example, they could not beat the drums, they could not dance, they could not cane row the hair or cornrow, they could not blow the abeng, because the abeng was used as a form of instrument. So the abeng can tell you when it's time for war, when it's time for celebration. Same thing with the drum. There are certain African beats that tell you that, listen, it's time for us to gather for battle. And so they did not want that. But the question I want to ask this class is, why do you believe that they wanted to, why they prevent the Africans from cornrow or cane rowing their hairs? Sorry, ear. Why you
Sir,
think? Go ahead.
sir, I read somewhere that the ladies, when they can roll the hair, it would be like a map route to escape the plantation. So the design of the cornrow would be set in a way where it's like a map to show that, oh, we're going to do this because we're going to escape and stuff like that, sir.
Very good. So the Africans used to use the map, the hairstyle to, yes, your God bless us with good hair. All hair is good enough, but sometimes we believe that our hair is, hairstyles and all of this is bad. But God bless us with good things. So we could use the same hair that them call bad hair and create maps in our hair as ways of escape. Yes. And so that is one. So they wanted to control them, right? So they wanted to control them and they were fearful of resistance. Now, if you're going to talk about fear of resistance, you need to tell us why they wanted to why they were fearful of resistance. What were the different instruments that they were fearful of? Even their religion, they were fearful of their religion because they're fearful that the Africans would obey them. They were very fearful of Obia. Very, very fearful. So one, you could look at this. The next reason why they try to restrict them, as mentioned here, is the productivity. They wanted to ensure that they are maximizing their labor so they could get enough profit. All right? So these are some of the reasons why the colonial establishment wanted to prevent them from practicing their culture. In fact, if you want to summarize all the reasons in one, everything leads to fear. Not really, but without work productivity and the fact that they wanted to indoctrinate them with their white supremacy, that everything white is good, then with that now, it's not really out of fear, but out of control. So there are several different measures or methods that they are going to use to suppress or restrict the African from practicing their culture. Quite a lot of methods they are going to come. The first thing that they are going to do is that they are going to pass laws. Somebody read this for me, please.
Past laws: masking, masquerade, obia, dancing, use of African languages, original African names. No crowding in public places, blowing horns or shells, ringing bells, firing guns, holding dances, or meeting without approval.
Yes, thank you very much, Sawyer. So right here, we can see that they would have passed rules to say that they couldn't wear masks. And you know, Africans love to wear the mask. They couldn't masquerade, that is the carnival, like with the different mask wearing. They could not use their original African names. They could not use the African language. We could not dance, could not practice obia, no crowding, can't crowd. You can't blow horns, you can't blow shells, you can't ring bells, you can't fire guns, you can't hold meetings without permission. They passed all of these laws to restrict, to suppress the African culture. But God is so good that when they were actually trying to stop the African culture, especially when it comes to the language, our African people, our ancestors back then, instead of saying eat, them say nyam. And they mix the English with the African and they form a new language. And that's the Jamaican Creole or the Barbadian Creole or the Trinidadian Creole or all the different Creoles in the Caribbean or the French Creole in Haiti. Those languages are languages of resistance. Because they told them that they could not speak the African. They made a law that they couldn't do it. Even right now where we have carnivals, those things emerge from Africa. Even today, the ringing of bells, schools ring bells, church ring bells, political parties ring bells. Right across the Caribbean, the JLP here in Jamaica ring the bell as a sign of freedom. The PMP blow their horns also as a sign of freedom. So even today, in today's culture in Jamaica, some of these African practices still continues. We see the JLP ringing bell and we not even know the significance. We hear the PMP talking about trumpet and blowing horn and we not even know that all of these things are linked back to Africa. All of that. So the first thing is that they passed laws that said that they could not do these things. The second thing that they did was that they restrict their freedom of movement or freedom of assembly. So you could not meet at certain times. You had to, everybody had to be in at a certain time. So they were curfew hours for the enslaved people. You could not move from one point to one point. So they had the curfew. So between 8 o'clock in the night and 5 in the morning, nobody could move about. Once you're African, could not move. Once you're an enslaved person, you couldn't move between those hours. You had to remain inside. You could not go and say you form in a church. You could not meet under the tree in a large group. You had to have 10 or less people under a tree, but you couldn't have 20 and 50 people under a tree. You're breaking the law. So they put in rules in place to restrict your assembly. They also put rules in place and in which they banned musical instruments. And another way in which they try to prevent their culture is harsh punishments. Because if they should see you wearing a mask, practicing obia, you're using your African names, you're speaking the African language, you're blowing the shell, you're ringing the bell, you have a gun, you're dancing or you're holding meetings without approval, guess what? They're going to punish you, and the punishment is not easy. One of the punishments, if you refuse to, if you're caught practicing any of these things, especially if you're caught practicing obia, you're immediately put to death. If you use the African language, they give you lash. If they caught you with drums, sometimes they cut off your hands or your fingers as a way of preventing you, because you love to play a drum. Well, when I cut off your hand, you're not going to play no drum. So since you love to play drum, continue to play it and see if I don't cut off your fingers or your hand. Harsh punishments. And therefore, if laws are put in place, if they are punishing you harshly, then you are going to want to stop. And after a period of your time, you think that everything African or everything black is bad or evil. The next way in which they use to suppress our culture is the role of missionaries. So they get sent churches into the plantation. They could not go to church, you know. The Africans were not permitted to go to church with the whites. They couldn't sit in church with the whites. However, the missionaries started to establish little churches on the plantation. And everybody meet together. Once there's white people there and they are preaching about the gospel, and they are telling you that, listen, you have to obey your master, obey the slave master. Slaves should obey their master. They're not going to preach to the enslaved people about God freeing the children of Israel from slavery. You could not talk about that. That was illegal. Certain scriptures in the Bible talking about freedom, that God died for Jesus died for the entire world. Those scriptures were not permitted. Could not talk about those scriptures. You have to only mention the parts of the scriptures that say, master obey, servant obey your master, for this is right. So when we meet again, when we're doing resistance, I'm going to show you some of the scriptures. And in fact, they had a Bible that the missionaries used, which removed most of the scriptures. And so the enslaved had their own Bible, which was different from the Bible that the whites used. And so these were some of the methods or measures that they would have used to suppress, to stop. Suppress means to stop the African from practicing their culture. But despite their ways, or despite the fact that they wanted to stop them, the mere fact that today we speak some African words, the mere fact that we have African food still that we use, the mere fact that we still use some of the hairstyles and the dress and the dance, it showed that they were not 100% successful. They were not successful. Well, I wouldn't say they were not, because to some extent they were. Because most of us think anything black is bad. So we are mentally enslaved, as what Bob Marley say, or Marcus Garvey. However, African cultural forms continued. African cultural forms persist despite the restrictions, despite the punishment, despite the missionaries, it persists. So for one example, the mission, you say we can't practice our religion. We are going to mix Christianity with African religion. So we mix Christianity with African religion, we call it Santeria. We mix Christianity with African religion, we call it revivalism. We mix Christianity with Shango, we call it voodoo. In fact, in Haiti, the voodoos in Haiti, the voodoo people who practice voodoo, you have Bible, you sing Christian songs, you do everything. You have your priest, just like the Catholic Church. You model everything of the Catholic Church and mix both of them together for it to survive. So enough time when they come in and they see them reading the Bible, they are reading the Bible, but they are also practicing their religion. So they swear and think that these people are, oh, we are doing such a good job because look, the enslaved people are reading the Bible. No, 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 not only the Bible alone, they're mixing the Bible and they're mixing it with the African for this to continue. And that's why in the Caribbean, we have a lot of nicknames. Because one, they're going to give us a name and they're going to tell us that, listen, your name is John. That's your name. But it could be that your name is Equiano, which is African. So you have your nickname, which is Equiano, which is your correct name. But if they ever hear you calling them the nickname, the Equiano, you're in problems. Then, so we know for sure that one way in which they were able, African culture was able to continue, was the first one that I mentioned here was creolization. They mix African culture with Europeans. And you give examples of this mixture. Another way, the reason why African culture was able to continue is that we have a high ratio of blacks. There are more blacks in the Caribbean than whites. And if we have more blacks than whites, you really can't deculturize and so many people. So the ratio, because you had more blacks than white, that's another reason why it continued. Another reason was that most of the enslaved people in the Caribbean were persons who were born in Africa. So most of the enslaved were African born. And if you're born in Africa, don't care how they try to deculturize you or to tell you to stop practice your culture. You're still going to keep it because you're born that way. You can't stop. Another reason, oh, and the Creole enslaved, you see these ones here are not the very good enslaved people. They are the ones who are the informers. They're the ones who go and tell lies. They're the ones who think that everything white is good because they're born in slavery. So they feel like everything in slavery is good. They don't know freedom. They don't have a taste of freedom. Is the Creole enslaved those who were born in the colony that continue to perpetuate the white supremacy? But the African born enslaved, when we do slave revolts and we check all the different slave revolts, we are going to see that for every single slave revolt that happened in the Caribbean, it's an enslaved person who was born in Africa that came here and said, listen, I know what it is to be free. Another reason is the planters' absenteeism. So what the planters did was most of them went abroad. They went back to their European country. They lived there, but they had somebody who oversee and watch the plantation. And because of that, the overseers really did not enforce most of the rules. They didn't enforce most of the rules. And so that allowed them, the African culture, to continue. All right? So, ladies, what we have looked at today, we looked at the reasons for African culture, why they wanted to stop it. We look at the measures or the methods they used to suppress it. And we look at the reasons why it still continues today. On that note, your writing activity is going to be from African cultural retention. Therefore, I am going to place this PowerPoint in the Google Classroom and the recording right now. And tomorrow, for tomorrow's class, I want you to spend the time and write, answer the question. And then on Wednesday, you're going to do a multiple choice. All right, ladies, please, I'm begging you, spend some time doing that work tomorrow. Please. All right, ladies, enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Same to you, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.